It is 11 o'clock and we are going to go ahead and get started. I know that we have a lot of attendees today, so I'm sure there will be more that will be coming on in the next few minutes. But I want to welcome you to Purdue at Westgate webinar series. Today we'll be having representatives from the George Mason University, the Greg and Camille Brony Center for Government Contracting, speaking on ChatGPT, Generative AI, and the future of the defense industrial base. Obviously, this is a topic that is close to mine right now and has even become somewhat controversial, as the founder of ChatGPT just approached Congress a couple weeks ago and is asking them to impose sweeping rules to hold the technology to account. I will speak on this more in just a little bit. I wanted to provide you with some insight of who I am and why this topic is of importance to the industry that I am and the industry that our team supports. My name is Samantha Nelson, and I'm the program manager for Purdue at Westgate. We are located within the Indiana certified Westgate at Crane Technology Park, where there are over 60 plus defense contractors and over 800 employees. These defense contractors, as well as our team, support and work with the Naval Support Activity Center, which is located just adjacent to us in Crane, Indiana. The Naval Support Activity Center is the third largest naval installation in the world, and within this naval installation is the Naval Surface Warfare Center, which is a shore command of the U.S. Navy and is under the Naval Sea Systems Command headquartered in Washington, D.C. This naval installation has close to 5,000 employees and has focus areas of expeditionary warfare, strategic missions, and electronic warfare. I tell you this background to provide you some insight as to why we would be so interested in ChatGPT and other AI technologies. These AI technologies could and most likely will affect the defense industry in multiple facets. My job with the support of our team here at Westgate is to provide programming opportunities that could potentially provide some information awareness to relevant technologies that the defense industry is currently concentrating on, and to often help foster relationships and collaborations between the small industry, large industry, government, and academia. As ChatGPT has become more of a prevalent topic, I found an article a couple months ago that I thought was extremely interesting. The title was, "What Will ChatGPT Mean for the U.S. Defense Industrial Base?" It was co-written by the two presenters of today's webinar. They currently work for the George Mason University Greg and Camille Brony School of Government Contracting out of Washington, D.C. I believe they will reference this article, but I would highly recommend that you read it. This article prompted me to reach out to the co-authors and see if they would be interested in presenting for us, and this is where we are. Just some logistics about today's webinar. As we have a lot of attendees, please make sure that your mics are on mute. We will leave approximately the last 15 minutes for Q&A, where we ask that you use the chat function, and we will monitor that questions for the presenters. A copy of the presentation slides, as well as the recording of this webinar, will be sent to all attendees. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce you to Olivia Letts and Noah Rivers.
All right, thank you very much, Samantha. We really appreciate it. So like Samantha said, my name is Noah Rivers. So I currently work, my full-time job is I manage a cyber threat intelligence team for a large financial institution. Before that, I spent 10 years as an active duty Air Force member, leading a variety of security, intelligence, and investigative teams. I'm also currently working on my MBA from George Mason, which is how I got linked up with the Brony Center for Government Contracting. So I met the director early on in my time at George Mason, and I've had an opportunity to support a few of their research projects and also to meet Olivia and co-author this article. So I'll turn it over to Olivia to introduce herself.
Hi all, thanks so much for attending. I'm Olivia Letts and I'm a full-time researcher with George Mason. So I work on reports for government clients and I do other center research on in-depth issues related to defense acquisitions. And I've also worked with a boutique defense consulting firm in the past and just grazed the surface of seeing how small companies breaking into the defense sector might have been able to save lots of time and money with help from AI like ChatGPT. And I've studied AI in the past some and examined it in the context of broader national security issues, but since working at the Brony Center and Noah, you can move ahead to the next slide now. So I've tried to think about more AI related issues in the context of acquisitions, and a little bit about us. The Brony Center is incredibly unique at George Mason. It's first in the nation university center that specifically is focused on the government contracting industry, which functions like a huge, crazy company like nothing else in the world. So it's nothing quite like it. and our research and events focus on acquisitions and all tangential subjects. So we've done reports on intellectual property issues to small business issues and budget reform. And now we're branching out more to AI. So as you can see, we've published some white paper research on predictive maintenance in DoD and data licensing challenges of acquiring AI solutions. So check us out if you're interested in these topics, and we'll go ahead and get started, guys. Thanks so much for coming. Yep. So yeah, like Samantha said, and thanks for that great introduction. We're here because last February, Noah and I were very lucky to get an article published in C4ISRnet, great publication geared toward the defense community and some tech and other related issues there. So we talked about what will ChatGPT mean for the U.S. defense industrial base. So read it if you haven't gotten the chance yet. Go into more detail on some of the things later in the presentation. But so we wrote the article. We came up with the idea because obviously, ChatGPT was experiencing huge growth, fastest consumer application in history to reach 100 million users in just 2 months. So it came out November 2022, and we were just playing around with it too. And we'd already seen plenty of use cases described in academia for writing, Wharton Business School papers, and being used in the healthcare industries and whatnot, and passing entry-level software engineering jobs for Google. But we hadn't seen it discussed yet. Generative AI and ChatGPT discussed very much yet in the defense context, specifically defense acquisitions. So we did focus more on the defense acquisition and contracting side of things. So positive use cases, we really honed in on how it can speed up the proposal process, which speeds up, every aspect related to how the DoD functions, and especially helpful for small and medium-sized companies that this can really help them with processes they're not familiar with. But we also talk about negative use cases that we'll get into more detail later, the flaws and weaknesses, like, the misinformation that ChatGPT produced, far from being a perfect tool, and also just national security issues, near term, smaller level cyber criminals like scammers, whatnot, creating misinformation, but could graduate to larger level threats like nation state actors in the future. So something that we tried to surmise about. And moving on, Noah, thank you very much. So we assume that a lot of you already kind of know, baseline information about ChatGPT, but just to kind of go over it again. So we're not gonna specifically talk about just ChatGPT. We're gonna keep it a little broad level, sometimes branch out into other aspects of AI revolutionizing things, but we're gonna try to focus on specifically the kind of technology that ChatGPT is, which is generative AI, which, as the name says, it makes things, it generates things, as opposed to discriminative AI, which classifies things. And so ChatGPT specifically is made by US-based lab OpenAI. So it's a company that focuses on what it calls as friendly AI, which is a funny euphemism for AI that has a benign impact on humanity. So ChatGPT uses very cutting edge language models, GPT 3.5 and 4, using large training sets of data. So it's already GPT-5 is in development. So the stuff is progressing rapidly. You do need paid membership to get GPT-4, but otherwise very low barrier of entry for anyone, from good actors to, black hat hackers and, cyber criminals, as we discussed in our article a bit. So super accessible. And tech companies are all scrambling to create their own competitors for ChatGPT. I got to play around with Bard a bit. Bard is supposed to be less conversational than the chatbot qualities of ChatGPT, but it's cool because it can in real time kind of, do Google searches and give you information about yourself, and in more kind of research purposes, I guess I'd say. But it's also an experimental phase, far from perfect. And yeah, all the companies are coming out with their competitors. Alibaba, the Chinese company, just kind of rolled out its own ChatGPT competitor, but an interesting issue for us to kind of keep track of in the future is, China's kind of push and pull between producing a chatbot that actually has useful output, but one that conforms to strict speech controls. So definitely an important issue for the defense community to examine in the coming years in this kinds of generative AI. And I'll let Noah take it away. So we're going to do some more broad level stuff before we get more into defense community too, but we're going to go into more positive and negative use cases for work or whatever else related to this technology. So take it from here, Noah.
Awesome. Yeah, so now that Liv has kind of set the stage, giving you the background of what our article was about and why we think ChatGPT and generative AI are interesting topics to focus on, we're really grateful for this opportunity to be able to expand on our article and look at kind of a broader set of benefits and risks associated with generative AI. So we've kind of split this into what we call the good, the bad, and the ugly. Good and bad are pretty self-explanatory. They're the positive and negative use cases associated with ChatGPT and generative AI, particularly. So These are use cases that can apply to many industries, but we think there's ties in every single one of these back to the defense industrial base. And then the ugly, is kind of looking at some of the doomsday predictions that people have come out with recently about kind of what the potential worst case AI-driven future is. So that's kind of what we're going to cover over the next few minutes. I'll give you the caveat that we're not going to do a deep dive or any kind of significant technical analysis of these, because frankly, we wouldn't have time to. Instead, we're going to focus on trying to expose the audience to many different benefits and risks that we think are relevant to the defense industrial base. So the first couple positives are, we want to talk about some of the efficiencies that tools like ChatGPT and other generative AI bots can provide. One example I found was there's companies out there that are using AI to record their sales calls and keeping transcripts and actually providing feedback after the call is done to the people that are on these calls, saying, here's the things you said, here's some things you could maybe do better next time. Another way that companies are using this for efficiency is in the realm of graphic design. So you can use ChatGPT. You can also link up with other generative AIs that produce images to kind of quickly iterate on images that you're trying to create. So one example I found was somebody originally wanted to create a graphic of a fun, quirky car, and then they wanted to change it to a fun, quirky retro car. And literally with a few keystrokes, you can have the bot make those changes rather than you needing to actually manually make the changes to the image yourself. The other thing is, and I think this is going to be particularly interesting to see how this develops over the next few years, is the customizability of ChatGPT. So like Liv mentioned, the actual ChatGPT platform itself is based on a large language model that the OpenAI lab developed over many years. They gathered things like 30 years worth of New York Times articles and most of Reddit and all of Wikipedia and many other large online data sources like that, and curated it into the data set that is the basis for ChatGPT. But there are now a number of customizable versions that are coming out, and there's ways that people are using the kind of conversational chatbot that's built into ChatGPT, but aiming it at data sets of their choosing. So one of the examples here is Microsoft Azure, through their cloud platform, has a way that you can actually kind of choose the data set that you want to aim ChatGPT at. And I think this is an area that a lot of companies are probably going to be interested in exploring in the future. Although I think the barrier to entry here is going to remain pretty high, because in order for the tool to really be effective, you need a pretty large and pretty well curated data set to aim the tool at, but definitely something to keep an eye on over the next few months and years. Another great way to leverage tools like ChatGPT is for optimization. So one use case that we looked at here was job hunting, because it seems to be something that a lot of people are interested in right now. As more and more job postings are available with longer and longer lists of responsibilities, one way that you can use ChatGPT is to take your resume, feed it into the tool, and then also feed it a list of responsibilities and say, hey, ChatGPT, give me some ideas for how I can optimize my resume for this particular job. This is particularly powerful as more and more companies are using AI bots to kind of do the first cut of analysis on resumes. My perspective is if a bot's going to be the first one to read your resume, a bot might as well help you write your resume as well. Another area that I've played around with a little bit, I'm curious to see developments over the next few months and years, is organization, particularly data analytics. So in my personal experience, loading large data sets into tools like ChatGPT isn't necessarily intuitive or easy, although there are a number of tutorials out there for how you can do it. And there's the potential, though, as the models continue to develop, that tools like ChatGPT are going to be able to provide some unique insights more quickly than a person sorting through thousands of layers of spreadsheets. I think this one is particularly relevant to some future applications in the defense industrial base, because my experience with every company I've worked with in national security and in the contracting space, usually has tons and tons of data that they have to sort through. So I think this is an area where some companies may be able to leverage this capability in the future. However, we'll talk about this when we get to the bad. You've got to be really cautious about what information you put into the tool. We'll address that more in a bit. One of the other ways that there's some benefits with ChatGPT is brainstorming, content creation, and editing. So one thing that I'll note with brainstorming is that because ChatGPT is based on a data set that's created by humans, it's not ever going to provide you with truly unique, brand new content that nobody's ever thought of before. In a lot of ways, it's just kind of regurgitating information that somebody else put in some other idea or article or tool at some point in the past. That being said, what I've found is that when I'm researching a new topic, asking ChatGPT or a tool like it to give you maybe the top 10 most important things about this topic is a good way to make sure you're not missing something obvious. Because it is based on a very large data set, it usually does a pretty good job of giving you kind of the obvious common sense things you would think of, but maybe also a couple other ideas that people have had related to whatever the topic is that you're researching that you may not have thought of. You can also use it both to create a large number of rough drafts that you then hone into something more final later, or the inverse is you create the first product and feed it into ChatGPT and ask it to provide you with edits or recommendations for how you can streamline or say it better. I will say ChatGPT is great at English grammar. It's far better than I probably ever will be. So I do like using it to edit or provide inputs for how I can make my writing better. Again, like we'll talk about in a minute, you've got to be cautious about what kind of data you actually put in there. So now that we've talked about the good, we're going to cover some of the bad. So there are a number of privacy and security concerns with ChatGPT. So one that you see in the middle there is as more and more companies put out new plugins or other ChatGPT related tools, it's also becoming a very common attack vector or lure for threat actors to put ChatGPT related content out on the internet or in emails. And because it's garnered so much interest from a lot of people, they're more likely to click on links or navigate to websites that they think are going to help them optimize and do some of the other positive things that we've talked about before. When in reality, sometimes it may just be a fake site or a fake link that a threat actor is using to get you to download malware or give up your credentials or something of that nature. The other big concern, and this is what I've referenced a couple times, is ChatGPT is based on a data set that was originally created and curated by OpenAI. However, they are continuing to train the data model on additional inputs that new people are putting in. Like Liv said, there was 100 million users in the first 2 months. There's a lot of people putting a lot of information into ChatGPT. This is a big concern for large companies. I'll use a defense industrial base example that I was thinking of earlier today. So let's say that Raytheon and Boeing are competing for a contract at some point in the future. And Boeing knows that Raytheon has spent the last 2 years feeding all of their contract proposals into ChatGPT and asking it for advice on how they can streamline and do better. Knowing that, Boeing could go to ChatGPT and say, hey, ChatGPT, pretend that you're a contracting officer for Raytheon. How would you handle this situation? How would you write this contract proposal? And it's possible that the information that ChatGPT gives back to that Boeing person may actually in some ways be based on information that Raytheon had previously put in. So this is where I said before, I think some companies looking at ways to leverage ChatGPT on their own data sets is going to be one area of particular interest in the future, because just feeding personal or sensitive or proprietary data into the tool that's open to everyone might have some long-term unintended consequences.
Yeah, it's not supposed to store I see some discussion in the chat about this. So it's not supposed to store your personal data, but like in Italy, like some of the training data did include personal data from Italian citizens. So like Italy's introduced a temporary emergency ban demanding OpenAI to stop using this personal information. So OpenAI stopped people in Italy from accessing the chatbot. So in general, there's no kind of real coherent regulation against ChatGPT and other forms of generative AI yet, but other countries are kind of taking, besides the United States, are taking more strides in this direction. So Europe is kind of getting more strict about this, given their general data protection regulations, one of the strongest privacy and data protection laws in the world. Kind of their European Parliament members are considering an act that may kind of constitute regulations on ChatGPT to prevent this kind of thing. So in OpenAI, their model is closed, so we don't have insight into their decision making and the neural networks that comprise the GPT 3.5 and 4 system. So they're not supposed to store personal data. Also, cyber criminal activity kind of could change this too and allow it to be transferred. So, all right, no.
Yeah, no, thanks, Liv. And the other thing too, there was an instance about a month after ChatGPT came out where there was a vulnerability that was discovered where people were able to view some of the inputs that another person had put into it. Now, that wasn't by design in the tool, but it was something that was discovered by a threat researcher. So that also kind of raised the concerns with a number of companies. How secure is this data that I'm actually putting in here? Are other people going to be able to see even the questions that I'm asking this in the first place? So I think there's more to explore in those areas. Like Liv mentioned, a lot of countries are moving to regulate these technologies more closely. And I think as that happens, we'll discover more about kind of what's behind the curtain in some of these cases. We've talked a little bit already about some of the negatives associated with this tool, but another is new and enhanced attack vectors. So one that I think is particularly relevant now is historically about 90% or so of cyber intrusions into companies happen after somebody clicks on something they shouldn't have in a phishing email. It used to be a lot of the training around employees catching phishing emails had to do with look for incorrect grammar or punctuation or items that don't necessarily make sense in the context of your business. And that was kind of the hallmark of here's what a bad email looks like. With ChatGPT, it's very easy, or it's become very easy for threat actors to make very realistic looking phishing emails with very little effort. I mean, within a few seconds, you can create a very realistic looking phishing email. That's something that I think is kind of a short-term concern. In the long term, there are some concerns about the coding abilities within ChatGPT and how they could allow threat actors to kind of develop malicious code. Now, ChatGPT itself will tell you that it can't produce malicious code, but if you tell it that it's for pen testing instead of actually trying to penetrate an organization, it sometimes will give you some interesting results. That being said, like Liv mentioned before, at this point, the coding abilities of ChatGPT are kind of at an entry level. I mean, it's passed an entry level Google coding exam. But from everything that I've talked to people about in this topic, and I think this is a common thread that you're going to see through several of these topics that we're talking about, is ChatGPT is not a tool that a novice can take and immediately become an expert. If you harness the efficiencies within the tool and you link it up with someone who already has some baseline expertise in an area, they can create some really significant outputs. But it's not something where somebody who has no background in software engineering or creating any kind of malware in the past could create this very robust malware out of nothing. But I saw an article recently where the founder of OpenAI was talking about how he thinks of the current iterations of ChatGPT as kind of like the first model of the iPhone, and how over the course of the next few years, we're going to see significant developments in this technology. So kind of a longer term concern is, once ChatGPT gets better at coding, is it going to lower the barrier to entry for threat actors to make malware?
Yeah, well said, Noah. And, ChatGPT is subject to all the same problems that plague other types of AI. So jumping in on the black box problem here. So the black box problem in and of itself, we put here, it's not exactly an attack vector. So the black box problem in AI in general just refers to the fact we can't gaze into neural networks and understand how they use their weighted networks to come to the final output decisions. But there can be attacks like AI poisoning, where attackers manipulate training data by injecting poisoned or diluted data to control the behavior of trained ML models and deliver false results. So if bad or just irresponsible actors or even like managers of ChatGPT-esque technology, if they have poisoned GPT data or algorithms to provide toxic entries or answers, we can't identify that readily due to the black box problem. So even if, hackers can't immediately jump in and use like perfect code to attack, but AI poisoning kind of exacerbates the potential attack vectors with technologies like ChatGPT. So.
Yeah, thanks for that, Liv. So the final kind of bad thing that we're going to talk about with ChatGPT is, we've mentioned this already, but biased and incorrect information. So this is something I think has gotten maybe most of the press in the US at least. There have been concerns from both the political right and the political left about various biases that ChatGPT has shown in certain answers. I think the most interesting research that's been done in this area was a group of researchers actually gave ChatGPT a handful of personality tests and a bias test just to see where the kind of basic language model that OpenAI put out there falls. What they found was that ChatGPT perceives itself to be highly open and agreeable. It has a Myers-Briggs personality type of ENFJ. It's among the bottom 15% of test takers and in the realm of the dark triad personality traits. And from a political perspective, ChatGPT came out as having progressive views, but no significant bias between authoritarian and libertarian. I heard one person joke in the aftermath of this article coming out that ChatGPT sounded a lot like a tech bro from Silicon Valley. And honestly, I have a hard time disagreeing with that. The reality is OpenAI had several hundred employees that they hired from Silicon Valley over several years building and training these models. And I think it's kind of interesting that, at least in some ways, it appears that even this kind of impersonal technology kind of took on the personality of its creators, or at least it would kind of seem that way. The other thing when it comes to incorrect information, this was a news story that came out a couple of weeks ago that I thought was particularly interesting. There was a lawyer who used ChatGPT to file a motion in court, and they found out after the fact that several pieces of information that ChatGPT included in that motion were incorrect. And even when the lawyer went back and asked ChatGPT to provide the sources that it used, the tool basically made up court cases that didn't exist and cited it as precedent. I think this highlights one of the biggest flaws in tools like ChatGPT, which is that the way that they're designed right now, they don't really know how to say, I don't know. So if they have the answer, they'll give you the answer. And if they don't have the answer, they'll make up a plausible sounding answer. So this is definitely something to be aware of when you're using these tools, that the outputs that it gives you need to be fact checked, and that you shouldn't just trust the output or even the sources that it cites necessarily. So bottom line is, ChatGPT is a powerful tool that can do a lot of good, but it's not universally without fault. And even OpenAI, if you go to their main page before it'll even let you use ChatGPT, it gives you kind of a list of warning labels. And one of the things it says is that the outputs of this tool are not always correct and are sometimes biased. So even they acknowledge that it's not a perfect tool. All right, so before we move on to a few more kind of defense industrial based specific use cases, we wanted to address some of the, what we call the ugly, the doomsday predictions that people have put out recently related to AI. You see some of the headlines here: AI poses a risk of extinction. There's one of the founding fathers of AI quit Google to warn about the technology's dangers. That middle one, I think, was particularly interesting to me because the quote that came from that person was that he thought the rapid progress of AI was going to transform society in ways that we don't fully understand, and not all the effects are going to be good. I think that's a kind of measured approach to the future, where it's obvious that as technology in general and AI in particular continues to accelerate the pace at which we do life and business, we're not always aware of the ways that that technology is impacting our lives until maybe a few years after the fact. That being said, I'm personally a little bit skeptical of some of the more doomsday looks at the future of AI. To be perfectly honest, I'm not sure that the motivations behind all of those doomsday predictions are necessarily where they should be. A couple examples are, if you're a competitor of OpenAI and you're trying to catch up to them, it might be worth your while to push for government regulation that says that companies like OpenAI can't release any more tools for a certain period of time until we can figure out how to do it safely, because that might give your company the chance to catch up to the industry leader. And on the other hand, if you're OpenAI, you might be lobbying Congress to try to put more restrictions on the development of AI. I can't remember the exact source of this. I apologize that I can't give you the citation, but I remember hearing somebody say a few weeks ago that their estimation of OpenAI pushing for regulation was that OpenAI was telling Congress, hey, that ladder that we just used to climb to the top of the AI world, it's not safe for anyone else to come up after us. So that being said, I'm not sure that the motivations are completely pure behind all of these doomsday predictions, but it's definitely something that we should continue to take seriously, particularly because of that last example at the bottom there. So there was an Air Force colonel that came out. So initially he spoke at a conference, and the way that he made it sound was that the Air Force had actually run a simulation where they had a drone controlled by AI that was supposed to find and eliminate targets. And after a few iterations of the drone telling the operator, this is a target that I think I should destroy, and the operator saying, no, you shouldn't, the drone started to target the operator because the operator was the primary barrier to the drone completing its mission. The colonel later backtracked those statements and said that it was a thought experiment, not an actual simulation that the Air Force had run. But I think what this highlights is that as we continue to integrate AI into many different parts of our lives and into the defense industrial base and ultimately into weapons systems, we are going to need to be very cautious about making sure that we put the right guardrails and checks and balances in place to make sure that we're doing it in a safe way. So next, I'll turn it over to Liv to talk about a few more use cases that are kind of very specific to the defense industrial base.
Yeah, thanks for that, Noah. So yeah, why Noah so well presented those very high level headlines. They all have bearing on defense organizations in general, workplace efficiency and security. And a disclaimer, so OpenAI, the company itself, has claimed to rule out military and high risk government applications. So for the foreseeable future, you won't see any ChatGPT and DoD partnerships itself. So a lot of what I'm going to be discussing is kind of generative AI and ChatGPT-esque technologies as you'll use in the defense sector. And also defense workers can harness ChatGPT personally for their own efficiency. But in the context of Gen AI, if I refer to ChatGPT, I mean the broader impacts of especially this kind of text-based machine learning. So what is the Pentagon or government think about ChatGPT? Obviously, quite a lot of things. There's a lot of roadmaps and plans and strategies out there. Despite the lack of kind of cohesive regulations on AI, we're in a hype phase where we're kind of developing without many checks and balances. But obviously, the Pentagon's taking it seriously, trying to incorporate it into more weapon systems. It established the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center in 2018, which merged into the Chief Digital and AI Office a couple years later. So the FY20, you can follow where the money goes to find Pentagon priorities. So for overall AI-related tech and just the RDT&E budget, it was roughly $1.8 billion for the FY24 budget request, compared to about $1 million in FY20. And this is, not to consider, it's probably more than this because it's allocated across different buckets of money that in the Defense Department that use AI-enabled technologies. But nevertheless, this is not as much as some people would like to see in terms of investment in technologies. It's not as high as some predictions. 2020 market research conducted by Bloomberg posited that by 2023, DoD contract spending on AI would rise to $2.8 billion, but that hasn't exactly happened. So it'd be interesting to track this spending more cohesively across different budgets. But since we published our article in February, there's tons more commentaries on ChatGPT itself, some optimism and skepticism, although it's measured optimism. So both the CIOs of the Space Force and Air Force have been cited about the being optimistic about the efficiency aspects that technologies like ChatGPT can bring. Kimberly Sablon, Principal Director for Trusted AI and Autonomy in the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense, she's cautiously optimistic and noted how the military struggled to attract coders. So this could actually, generative AI could help because it produces code. I think something like 66% of US-based workers who use ChatGPT for work use it for coding. So she believes that this could accelerate the production of military-based software throughout the Department of Defense. And the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency officials have cited that the technology could supplement the work of analysts and help recognize patterns that human analysts cannot. So again, this is for generative AI, which is different from technologies already being used by the DoD, such as that's purported to be used for Project Maven, like discriminative AI for identifying. So lots of commentaries from the Pentagon. But as we talked about in our article, we're trying to surmise, and some of this is already now, a lot of people are already using ChatGPT to accelerate the contracting process. I have a friend who runs a cybersecurity company. He thinks people would be foolish to not use ChatGPT to accelerate the proposal process. Imagine being a contractor and being able to put in, at the proposal stage, being able to put in, every winning RFP you've had and the prompt for that, and then a new prompt, and then get another winning prompt out of that. So we believe like generative AI can really accelerate the proposal writing process. One of my first exposures to ChatGPT was through a colleague. So we were researching the Truth in Negotiations Act. It's just, it's a threshold. It's a regulation specified in the Federal Acquisition Regulation. So it's a body of law governing government procurement. So this requires companies to turn over cost and accounting data. It's very cumbersome to go through. So you have to fill out a very large table from FAR table 15-2 in your proposal process if the contract you're applying for is over a certain threshold. And if you could use ChatGPT or ChatGPT as technologies to fill out that table for you based on input data, can seriously help with the regulation aspects of the proposal process, especially for little guys that are not familiar necessarily with these processes. So I also saw a very pretty poem written by ChatGPT about this regulation. Otherwise can be a dry topic, but it made it sound very, very fun. But some of the things we can only kind of surmise more on the impact that generative AI will have on the actual product development and delivery of products and services. Yet to see a lot of this. So on the on the bright side, hopefully we can imagine that it could reduce the cost of products, replace redundant tasks within the proposal process, really help streamline things for both the government side and the contractor side. But any DoD products that use kind of code generated by generative AI would be subject to attack if it's employing poison data. So, have to be actually any security impacts this has for companies doubly magnified when it's, the Pentagon using these technologies. So the pitfalls we discussed of ChatGPT are comparable to, the risks faced by DoD, which is essentially a massive business organization in itself. And, people are concerned, not that concerned. They're hopeful about the ways that ChatGPT can replace redundant tasks that people don't want to do, frees up more time for efficiency and brainstorming, and probably, in the end game, hopefully better products. But what we are concerned about is which jobs are going to be replaced is at the forefront of everyone's minds. But we see this technology more as enhancing jobs, and the middleman and middle managers that direct people, that applies to generative AI and prompting skills. And this could replace some of the work of procurement lawyers, because it can draft, generative AI can draft, legal language as well, and a lot of these processes. So there are certain jobs that are going to be changed. The need for, legislators to write legislative language and regulations to write regulatory language on this, on defense acquisition issues. That need's not going to go away. And moving on. Yeah, so Akbar on the government side. So as part of the Trade Wind Initiative by the Chief Digital and AI Office, there's a new tool out for the government side that's still under development and still requires a human in the loop at every stage of the process. So like the RFP, request for proposal process, and defense acquisition, super relationship oriented. I don't foresee that changing anytime soon. But Akbar can really cut down. It's cited as being intended to help, on the government side, anyone dealing with solicitations, to really cut down on the time it takes to be able to reduce calls for proposals as well. So here's kind of a screenshot from their website about, I guess how it might look for people that are using this tool to streamline acquisitions on the government side. And Noah, if you go to the next slide. So this is kind of a homemade. So what you can do with GPT-4. So if you have an account for ChatGPT, you can get GPT-4. You can log in and you can kind of download the key, I guess, used by the GPT model, and kind of put it into your own virtual environment and streamline the data set that you use. So someone did this specifically for federal acquisition regulation governing procurement law, and they were able to. It's not perfect, but a lot of people are kind of buzzing over this tool. So you can even specify for which part of the FAR you want it to focus on too. And it's not conversational at all like ChatGPT, but unlike ChatGPT, it can say, I don't know. If you ask it a question, it doesn't understand. So this is something that someone specifically made more for the government contractor side of defense acquisitions and trying to get the information you need and for advice. So some interesting applications so far. And I'll turn it back to Noah if he wants to start on our predictions.
Definitely. So now that we've kind of reviewed, there's been so much information that's come out since we published our article in late February. What we just tried to do is give you kind of the high level of the things that we thought were most interesting and relevant. But since we've been immersed in this topic as well, we wanted to give kind of what our analysis and what our predictions were for the future of AI. So this has already kind of been covered, but really the first big takeaway for me is that right now, tools like ChatGPT aren't very reliable, but generative AI is going to continue to advance in scope and complexity. So there's a lot of government regulation and companies, and everyone is trying to figure out how exactly they're going to deal with tools like this in the future. But a colleague told me a statistic a couple of days ago that somebody was estimating that about 90% of students were using ChatGPT to generate content for their schoolwork. Liv mentioned something about 60+% of people that do coding are using ChatGPT to integrate into at least some level of their coding. The reality is this tool is already here and it's already being used, especially by some of the youngest generations in the workforce. And the best thing that I think we can all do is to try to get as smart as we can about the current iterations of this tool so that as it advances, we're already kind of abreast of where it's going.
Yeah, no, jumping in. So that's 66% of people, I guess, using ChatGPT for work purposes, use it for coding, creating code, or at least it can help assist with, enhancing code. It kind of puts the cherry on top of products that have already been made by the coders. It doesn't, if you're a responsible coder, you don't use it you don't rely on it completely. ChatGPT cannot be fully relied upon. It's full of errors, and the new GPT systems or GPT related systems coming out are supposed to correct a lot of that. I predict that a year from now, ChatGPT itself might not even be the premier text-based generative AI form of generative AI anymore. It could be a competitor by then. But we need to be, competitors in the business space are going to see their competitors incorporating this technology. And if they don't, they're going to feel like they're going to go extinct. So we see this hype phase kind of continuing right now and snowballing. I'm a little bit cautious in one regard. I think that it might take something very, very serious for us to finally kind of incorporate or implement a serious regulation curtailing the use of generative AI like ChatGPT before we finally start taking a step back and trying to assess where it's ethical or not to incorporate it. But agreeing with Noah, it's just going to continue to advance in scope and complexity from here. I mean, GPT-4 came out sooner than people expected. GPT-5 already still in the works, and all the tech companies are scrambling to make their own. So it's just gonna keep accelerating.
Yeah, it's a great point, Liv. And personally, I'm a heavy user of ChatGPT right now, but to me, the biggest hindrance is that black box problem, not really knowing how it operates or where it gets its information from necessarily. And the fact that it sometimes makes up sources also kind of concerns me. If there were a competitor that were to come out that would be able to provide high fidelity citations for some of the work that it was providing, to me, that would vault it ahead of ChatGPT. So very curious to see kind of the advances in that space. I'd say I'm cautiously optimistic. I deal with threats and risks in my job on a daily basis. So when I'm faced with kind of worst case scenarios and doomsday predictions, I tend to try to look at how likely those future possibilities are to come to pass. Personally, based on the information I've seen up to this point, I think kind of the worst case scenarios that some people have painted are not very likely to happen. But that being said, I think the AI and weapons systems argument is something that we need to take very seriously, particularly as a defense community. And we really need to be cautious about making sure that we're putting the proper guardrails in place as we continue to link AI to weapons systems.
I'm hopeful that incorporation of generative AI technologies can help speed things up in a good kind of way for Department of Defense and other defense agencies. So within the DoD, I think that speeding things up will be a good thing, but also DoD is still kind of a methodical beast, and DoD can manage to harness some control over these technologies from accelerating at a harmful pace. But the problem is international security is unpredictable. If you have a nation state actor employing these kinds of technologies for cyber attacks against another nation state, you can't foresee how world leaders are going to react, which is also going to prompt DoD to have to respond and interact with these technologies in different ways in a kind of speedy and adaptive framework as well. So that's kind of a challenge too, is the push and pull between how methodical are we with the incorporation of these technologies, and or how much do we kind of give into the acceleration of further development and incorporation of generative AI, and to replacing kind of traditionally human in the loop performed tasks.
Yeah, so the last thing I'll say on this is one of the questions that I've received a lot is how concerned should I be about ChatGPT replacing my job? And my answer is right now, not very worried, but as the models continue to advance, maybe a little bit more worried. Like we mentioned before, that the outputs just don't seem to be reliable enough to really replace humans. And these tools at this point are really more of an enhancement to a baseline level of expertise rather than taking a novice and making them an expert. That being said, I think one of the major divisions in the future of our workforce, particularly in knowledge work areas, is going to be between people that know how to use these tools well and people that don't. So the approach that I'm taking to ChatGPT, to generative AI, and to AI in general is I'm an early adopter. I'm someone that is trying to learn as much as I can now, because once these models advance to the point that they are fully functional and potentially capable of replacing at least some jobs, I'd rather already have a pretty solid understanding of how these tools work and how I can use them to make me better, rather than trying to scramble and catch up at that point. Do you have any closing thoughts on this, Liv?
Yeah, no, I would also advise people to keep abreast of the different kind of competitors arising in this space as well. And you can kind of even use different kinds of chatbots for different purposes at the moment. Like I believe maybe it's Bing or one of them actually do provide sources, or are kind of at the start of trying to incorporate that technology sources for its information. So you can use kind of different kinds of chatbots for your needs at the moment, although eventually that might all be integrated into one kind of vanguard state-of-the-art text-based generative learning model. But GPT-4 is 10 times more powerful than 3.5. So it's a great time to start using it if you want to foot the bill for that membership in ChatGPT to practice your prompting skills as a defense professional or any kind of professional, I would conclude.
Awesome. So before we jump to questions, we just had a couple of kind of fun examples we wanted to use. So since we've been talking about these tools, we figured we might as well, since Westgate at Crane and Purdue at Westgate are our hosts for this today, we figured we'd ask ChatGPT and Bard some questions about the technology park and just see what it said. So we started by saying, hey, give us in 3 sentences or less 3 most interesting and impactful things that Westgate at Crane has accomplished. And it gave us these fairly complicated, long, very kind of detailed, positive things that the technology park has done and has worked on. We asked the exact same question to Google Bard, and it gave us similar answers, but in a lot more succinct and quantitative way. It's just kind of interesting to see the differences between how different chatbots answer questions. We also went back to ChatGPT. So I actually went to the Westgate at Crane website. I went to the job board. I clicked on the very first job posting that was available. And then I went to ChatGPT and said, what are the 5 most common interview questions that companies would ask when they're hiring for this electrical hardware design engineer position? And it gave me, I don't work in this industry, so I don't know how good these are, but it gave me at least very thorough answers to think about to prepare for an interview. And then finally, we also asked it, well, we told GPT, you are a marketing consultant that's been asked to come up with new ideas for events that will raise the national profile of Westgate at Crane and spur future investments in the park. What would you do? And it gave some pretty thorough ideas for, here's some events that the park could host that would maybe raise its national profile and spur some additional investments. So we kind of wanted to end with that because we thought, after talking about this tool on kind of a theoretical level, it's helpful sometimes to see what it actually does in reality. So I believe we went a little past the 45 minutes that we had allotted, but we still have some time left for questions. So I will navigate to that slide.
Samantha, too, if you have any final comments for the presentation, please.
Sure. No, I thought it was great, of course, and looking back at the chat, there's not a lot of questions per se. There's a lot of conversations that are going on. I see that Karen Bell, who is also with the George Mason University, she answered a couple of those questions, and I think you addressed them to Olivia. But it's obviously generated a lot of conversations, whether it comes to the defense industry or even academia industry. So there's a lot of things you can. The last thing that was said here just recently, let me look real quick.
And I see about using for paper. So it's for, for lower level classes, it's been used to actually write passing papers. But the more, if you go higher up in philosophy courses, for instance, ChatGPT can't access any of the super arcane sources yet. I don't actually know. I have to see how that's changed between 3.5 and 4, but at least with the release of 3.5, it was not producing the most well-written papers. So for, kind of lower passing grades, it was accomplishing, but there's, teachers can often detect kind of the ChatGPT type language use, and more though. So the thing about generative AI is also there's opportunities maybe in the job space too. There's so many companies springing up trying to create detection tools for ChatGPT, and of course other forms of AI. The other major security concern of deepfakes, so the video is generated using neural networks too. People are trying to come up with tools to be able to identify what a deep fake is. And it's the same thing with ChatGPT to feed it training data on what's written by ChatGPT and what's written by an actual person, and to decode what's a ChatGPT written assignment, for example, or actually written by a human. There are what kind of patterns to identify, and tools should be able to assist us with this more in the future.
What is the timeline of, it may vary, and I think I've seen this as well, but the timeline of actually asking a question. So when you ask the job or about the job at Westgate at Crane Tech Park, or the three areas of expertise, what's the timeline in getting that information from ChatGPT or other AI generatives?
So I was using GPT 3.5, which is the free version, which sometimes has some lag because a lot of people use it. If you pay for the monthly subscription to GPT-4, they guarantee you quicker access. That being said, with me using the slower model, it averaged about 5 to 10 seconds to get the answers. So the other thing too is we've included about 30 sources at the end. So when you send out these the slides to everyone, there's almost 30 links at the end that kind of go deeper into some of these topics that we talked about. I used ChatGPT to create those sources last night. I took 27 URLs, dropped them in ChatGPT and said, take these URLs and make them into APA formatted citations. And in about 3 seconds, I had 30 complete sources. I mean, they may not pass the freshman English classes version of basically what I'm saying is they might not be perfect, but they at least get most of the answers. And it was 3 seconds. So
is the contracting world within the government, are they the ones that are experimenting with this more prominently than other areas within the defense industry?
I think more at an individual level, people are kind of playing around with ChatGPT. Like I said, there's no DoD and ChatGPT partnership specifically, but the DoD's, like Akbar, kind of working on its kind of own forms of generative AI to assist with the government contracting community. But I'd say this kind of text-based generative AI is kind of more of a kind of new concept that the DoD in general is playing with, and compared to previous projects that have already started incorporating forms of discriminative AI and different forms of AI that use neural networks for different kinds of tasks. So I don't know. It's hard to say though. I unlike ChatGPT, I can say I don't know in answering whether or not it's kind of a more fast responder to the insertion of these technologies.
Okay, great. Let's see, there's a couple other comments here. I think does ChatGPT collect data from the user?
And there's good comments too and conclusions on.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, it's been a while since I've read the privacy statement that comes along with ChatGPT. So I can't speak specifically to what information ChatGPT or other platforms like it collect from users, but one of the things about ChatGPT is that you have to sign up for a unique account. So I know that at least the capacity exists for them to collect information that is unique to you.
We had a gentleman that is in the space who said it actually does. It uses reinforcement learning to tune the model. So.
Okay, yeah, that sounds right to me. So thank you for that input.
Great. All right. Well, I'd like to thank Olivia and Noah for taking the time to provide some exceptional content to this whole ChatGPT and AI technologies that are starting just to consume conversations and discussions. So I know they would be more than happy if you had any further questions for you to reach out to them directly. Obviously, they've done a lot of research and are just a plethora of knowledge when it comes to this type of subject. As I mentioned earlier, the slides and the recording of this presentation will be sent to all attendees. I would like to go off on a note to invite all of you to head to our website, and thank you, Noah, you've mentioned it quite often, the westgate-academy.com, and also the Westgate at Crane Technology Park website to see what other types of events and news that are happening within this tech park. I believe I'd mentioned about the number of defense contractors and employees that are within the park, but within the next 5 years, the park will be growing immensely as there has been a recent announcement of a microelectronics campus that will be a hub for semiconductor excellence being placed within the park. This campus is said to employ about 1,000 employees within the next 5 years. This will be a one-of-a-kind microelectronics campus in the US. And even the governor of Indiana even referenced this area as Silicon Heartland. So, and another industry that is currently being ramped up within this area is hypersonics. So we'll definitely be seeing more of a presence in that area as well. Having said that, I invite you to head to our website, check out all the exciting events and projects that are moving forward in Southern Indiana. Who knows, maybe you will want to join us here at the Westgate at Crane Technology Park. So thank you again, Noah and Olivia. We appreciate it. We look forward to hearing more about your research. And thank you everyone for attending, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Samantha, and thanks everyone so much in the comments for the kind words. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is a fantastic opportunity. Have a good day.